Welcome everyone to the Bent by Knowledge podcast, where we will dig into what current research and the Bible actually have to say about exercise and good nutrition. Well, welcome back, everybody. Today, here again, we have Dr. Kindann Fawcett. And if you remember the last time we spoke, we were addressing the top barriers to prevent families from healthy eating behaviors. And we went down a whole list. We'll remind you of that when we talk today. But today's conversation is going to be going back to those barriers and talking about some practical ways to eliminate those barriers from your life so that you can, as a family, practice healthy eating behaviors. But before we get into that, Kindann, can you just reintroduce yourself briefly so that we can get another idea of who you are and why you're here for this conversation?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again, Brittany. Okay, so I have a PhD in behavioral health science from the University of Arkansas, but originally I started my path in nutrition at Oklahoma State, which is ultimately where I have found my true passion lies. It's creating that very cool way to help people build healthy relationships with food, healthy relationships with exercise, and just in general become a holistic, healthy person. So that's kind of where I've come from. I live in Central Arkansas, but originally grew up on a farm in Oklahoma. So you'll hear me talk about all the things I learned on a farm and just kind of some of the ways I was brought up. And then also I have 3 kiddos, a 13-year-old daughter, so a teenager, a 10-year-old that has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is where you'll find some of my passion lies as well. And then an 18-month-old who is like a tornado. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, and you also have an incredible business. The website is stickandcarrot.com?
Yeah, stickandcarrot.org.
.org.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of came into fruition after I finished my PhD. And I think very much, and similarly to you, Brittany, I just felt like there was a gap. There was just this disconnect between my education and the public. And how can I create a place where people can get the information they need and the tools they need in a non-judgmental and maybe non-threatening way? Because I think sometimes people hear the word doctor or PhD or dietitian or exercise physiologist and they become overwhelmed.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you haven't already, I would definitely encourage you to visit Kindann's website. It's incredible. The things that she's able to offer are all listed on the website. I'll have the website domain in the show notes if you're interested in that. For sure. So as a reminder, last time we talked about the top barriers, and just a quick rundown of the list before we get into the nitty-gritty details. We talked about picky eaters. We talked about kids that want to eat different foods from the rest of the family. We talked about time as a significant barrier, lack of cooking skills, finances or the cost of food, taste of healthy foods, the proper introduction of healthy foods at an early age, mirroring and portion sizes of foods, grandparents and other family members that may give kids what they want. And in this time, the COVID-related barriers that we have to healthy eating. And so, like I mentioned, we're going to go through all these barriers and just address any way that Kindann and myself came up with to get rid of these barriers so that we can get families back on track. So with picky eaters, I saw here recently that research has shown that about 50% of parents say that their preschool age child is a picky eater. And so it's definitely common. I mean, I'm going to imagine that most families out there have experienced this. But this is different than other behaviors that we'll talk about because I want to talk about how kids grow into picky eater phases. Because I know some kids, like even from baby ages, don't like something, but sometimes they'll go and, at 4 years old, they'll randomly develop this picky eating habit. So what do you think, Kindann, we can do practically to help eliminate that barrier?
Brittany, I think there's a lot of things we can do. And I just want to start off by saying, moms and dads, grandparents, everybody out there, you're not alone. Everybody is experiencing it, from the lay individual to people like myself who have all this information at my wealth, but I can't get my kids to eat certain foods. So I feel the pain. I think something that is very practical that we can do is trying to think of ways that we can incorporate food groups and items that we need into their plate that is possibly okay with them. For instance, my daughter Mackenzie does not like broccoli. She doesn't like it cooked. She really doesn't like it raw, even if we douse it with ranch. But she likes cucumbers and she likes avocados. So one of the things that I've had to learn is to give over a little bit of that control and give her the choice. Okay, well, if you don't want broccoli, you have to choose other vegetables. So let's get some of those good fats in there with that avocado, and let's put in some cucumbers. So it's making some concessions. So I think that that's one of the big things, is being willing to think outside the box. And like I said, it is giving over a little bit of control as a parent or as a caregiver. We talked about last time when we were growing up, it was you eat what's put on your plate, and that's shifting. One, just because you want your meal time to be a happy, fun experience, which is kind of number two. When you have picky eaters and you're trying to create a dynamic in your household that is a fun environment for food, forcing somebody to eat something they really don't like is not going to work.
Mhm.
As much as we would like to think, oh, you're going to do what I say, it's not going to work. So trying to figure out a way that everybody wins. Another way is to give that child some autonomy. So thinking about different options. So, you have two different things. Maybe your main course is always the same, but maybe your vegetables different, or a side differs. And doing that before you make the meal, giving them the choice. Okay, tonight we're going to have pork chops for supper. Do you want macaroni and cheese, or do you want mashed potatoes? So giving them some choices. And then, like we said, throwing in some things, the two ingredients that maybe are not as or that are healthier. So making the cake with applesauce, or using olive oil instead of butter to cook, things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, there's some great tips. And when you were talking, I was playing this out in my head, and I feel like I've seen my sisters do this where my my niece or my nephew won't want a food, and my nephew or my niece will put up a fight and say like, "No, I don't want to eat that. No, I don't want to eat that." And my sister may give them another healthy option, and at a certain point they just throw their hands up and they're like, "Oh, fine, here's your unhealthy option." And I'm like, "No." That's not where we need to go. Like, we need to keep exploring these healthy options, because when you give in to them, it's just like any other behavior. They know that at a certain point, they're going to be able to get that end result if they just keep putting up a fight. So, like you said, giving them options, but making sure that the options on the table are the healthier option, and you're not just resorting to throwing in the white towel and giving them, the unhealthy option.
Absolutely. And I think that that kind of goes back to even the snacking choices. So when my kids come home from school, we have usually a snack because they're always starving. And I try to make sure once in a while we'll do an unhealthy snack. It'll be something fun like a little Debbie or something like that. I'm not going to lie to you. We do eat those things as well.
Yeah.
But usually it's pick a fruit, or like some meat and cheese or something like that. And they know that in our house, you don't have to ask to get any kind of vegetable. You don't ever have to ask to get fruit. You don't have to ask to get those types of snacks. If you're hungry, eat.
Mhm,
But you're not just going to go into the pantry and eat a bag of chips, if that makes sense. So
mhm.
giving them the autonomy to do some of the things for themselves, but having those restrictions. For instance, just like adults, we don't keep a lot of snack foods in our house that are unhealthy go-tos, just because it's very easy and very comforting to kind of go to those if you're unsure what you want, or you're just kind of maybe not hungry but kind of hungry. It's a lot easier to reach for the bag of potato chips versus go get an apple with peanut butter.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree completely. Another thing that you said too that made me think is making mealtime or snack time fun. So a great way for picky eaters to develop that palate and expand their palate is to make eating fun. So I know a lot of parents I've seen like on Pinterest where they do like the cookie cutters and all that stuff that, I mean, it takes a little bit of creativity, I can imagine, but to make it fun and where you're really interacting with your food, you're actually like it's a sensory experience for these kids. So it takes, let's say, a cucumber and it makes it into a star or something like that, and they see it and they are more likely to eat it. It's crazy how kids are so simple, but definitely a good way.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's actually funny that you say that. Well, actually, Santa Claus brought my kiddos an experimental food cookbook for Christmas this year. Again, going back to that idea of let's try some new things that are fun and maybe we can work some things in. And if they're doing it and if it's their idea, they're going to be more willing and they're going to have that buy-in, just like any of us with
Oh
behavior
yeah.
change. So I'm excited to try that.
That
It
sounds
could be
fun.
really crazy or it could be really good. I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. Another thing too, when you kept saying this is it's you're trying food. And I thought my brain always goes to the weirdest places, but I thought about going to a brewery, and when you say you want to try a type of beer, they give you a tiny shot glass of beer, and they don't give you a whole, 12-ounce glass of beer. And so when kids are trying new foods and they're expanding their palate, it is important to put just a small amount on their plate. Don't overwhelm them with this huge lump of like spinach or something. Give them a couple leaves or just like a tablespoon of cooked spinach and let them look at it, let them explore it, let them taste it, and then go from there. If you overwhelm them with too much, I feel like it's they're much less likely to buy in to that experience. Just like you would if you had a really strong IPA and a whole entire glass. Like, I'm definitely not gonna buy that.
Right. And that's a fantastic idea. I'm glad you brought that up. Which kind of just brings me to a little bit off topic, but we always talk about manners and doing things the correct way. And I know we're pretty big about this in our family. Put your napkin in your lap, use your fork, but when did we get away from that food as the sensory experience? And if we are really trying to get kids to try new foods and people to be more engaged and think about eating and nutrition intuitively, we should make it more of an interactive experience. Like you just said, looking at it, exploring it, touching it. But then also we have to find that balance where it's don't play with your food.
Yeah.
So as a parent, you kind of have to think, okay, well, is it worth getting my kid to try Brussels sprouts if they can look at it and be like, oh, it's a tiny, tiny little cabbage versus eat these, they're there for you to munch
Yeah.
on, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And you know what I was thinking too is that behavior in general is you have an input and you have a response. And so with if we're trying to get kids to practice healthy food behaviors, the input is them exploring and tasting the food, and the output is how you reward the child or what they get from it. And so when you're trying to get kids to develop these healthy eating behaviors, I was reading a little bit on this. It's instead of rewarding them with, let's say, dessert, like you say, you've heard parents say it, I know it. It's if you eat these carrots, you'll get your cake for dessert. Instead
Right?
of doing that, because when they practice that, they're developing the brain skills or the reward centers that say, I'm just going to get through this so that I can get to this thing that I want.
Yeah.
They were talking about how little things like just verbal praise. I mean, and you've done this with probably with toddlers, with your kids. It's like if they eat the peas, the scoop of peas, you're like, yay,
Yay.
so great. But it's that kind of reward rather than something that's going to condition them to just get through this. Can you talk to that at all?
Absolutely. I'm actually doing a study with the Duchenne Clinic, and we are working on parenting styles and food with these kiddos. And that's one of the things we talk about with parents. We say that an authoritarian parent, an authoritative parent and a permissive parent. Those are the three types that we usually see. We rarely see the neglectful type. But a parent that is warm and loving, but also has rules and conditions are the parenting styles that usually work, which goes back to what you were just saying. It's give that praise, and reward those behaviors. I am as guilty of it as anybody. When I do something well, I like people to say, good job, Kindann, way to go. That's
Right.
awesome. Yeah, I want a
Yeah.
cheerleader as well. I kind of wish I had one every time I did a load of laundry or made my but that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
But thinking of that as a behavior change tool, why would we not expect that to work in every type of activity that we want a behavior change?
Yeah.
When you have a client and they do one more push-up than they've ever done before, they want that positive reinforcement, which goes back to positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. People think that negative reinforcement is such as like something like spanking. It's not. Spanking is actually a positive reinforcement because you're giving something. You're giving a reward. So a positive reinforcement is praise, is giving something. Negative reinforcement is taking that step away. If you don't eat your carrots, you can't watch TV.
Mm,
Versus if you do eat your carrots, how about we play that game of Uno you wanted to play after dinner?
I like that.
So again, moving back, and this is kind of one of my soapboxes, not rewarding with food because it does create an unhealthy relationship with food in people's minds. Just like you were saying, it's that center in your brain that says, oh, if I do this, I get this. And people can start to associate, and it can lead to disordered eating when they think if I do good, I get food, or if I do bad, I don't get this. And if that's the case, then they have this unhealthy kind of mindset of associating food, and then they do like food is good, food is bad, which there is no good or bad food. Food is food.
Yeah.
So it's how we put that into our mind. So I love that you brought that up as well.
It's interesting that you say that. So I was thinking about basketball conditioning. Like go back in the day. Like I wish they didn't just say if you didn't get this layup, you were gonna do a super suicide. I wish it was
Right?
more of a positive experience. Otherwise, I might like running a little bit more.
No, for real. I think that that's why I am not a big runner. I always tell people, I'm like, if you see me running, you better run too, because I'm probably being chased, which I ran track, I ran cross country, I did it all. But for me, it's that kind of, I never got what they would call a runner's high. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of that I do it to get through it, to make myself better at basketball. I ran to make myself better at this. I did that. So I think that's a great idea with any type of behavior change, whether it's an 18-month-old or a 28-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. This list is so long. This is probably one of my favorite things to talk about is this one, but typically, I mean, you're going to have to be patient too as a parent, and you're going to have to expose them over and over again. I was doing my research, and there's a lot of research that shows, and I think you mentioned this last time maybe, that you need about 15 exposures to a new food before the child accepts it. So that you have to be persistent, but you also have to be patient. 15 exposures could be over the course of 2 weeks, it could be over the course of 3 months. And
Yeah.
so you've got to keep going. You can't just say, "Oh, they spit out the spinach this time. They definitely don't like spinach." You got to keep going with them and be patient with them until they accept it. Like there are things that I've developed a palate for that I never would like. Going back to the beer example, I don't think anybody actually likes beer the first time they try it. But you
Right.
have to like keep trying it, and then you finally develop your palate for it. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things is just to be patient and keep exposing them.
Yeah, and on that, I'll go ahead and mention, thinking about different ways to expose them. So you were just saying, like the beer example, some people are never going to like an IPA, but they might like a lighter ale. The same thing with vegetables or fruits. Some people do not like applesauce because they don't like the texture, but they'll eat a real apple. Or, some people don't like cooked vegetables because they're mushy, or they don't like canned vegetables. My husband, for instance, he swore that he did not like green beans. Well, in his mind, his perception of green beans was opening a can of like Del Monte green beans and putting them in a bowl and microwaving them. Where I grew up, you take bacon and you fry some bacon, or you fry some ham, you throw some onion, then you throw some garlic, you throw a little bit of olive oil, some salt, some pepper, and you let like real green beans simmer in a pot for 2 hours. He loves those, but there's bacon in them. Who doesn't like bacon,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
But it's thinking about ways like we talked about last week. If your kid doesn't like broccoli, Would they try it cooked? Okay, they don't like it raw. Would they try it with some ranch? Would they try it with cheese? Is there another vegetable in that same group? And I go back to vegetables a lot because kids tend to eat fruits a little bit more readily than vegetables because fruits are sweet and they're usually very colorful, like red or orange or yellow, which a lot of times vegetables we think of green, kind of
Mhm.
peas, stuff like that. But if you can try a different way to do it, for instance, I'm trying to think of something that the kids. Oh, okay. So Mackenzie, I'll go back to Mackenzie because she is my picky eater.
Uh-huh.
She hates tomatoes, but girl loves herself some ketchup and loves herself some salsa, which I try to explain to her that ketchup is actually made from, you know, tomatoes. So I one time I was like, I'm just going to do a little experiment. So I got the sugar-free ketchup. It failed. She did not like it. However, we just talk about how these things are made from that. So if your kid doesn't like, let's just say they don't like zucchini. Well, can you make zucchini bread? Like you'd make a banana bread. Can you do zucchini bread or could you do carrot bread? We talked about last time how I sneak those things in. I might puree vegetables and put it in sauce.
Mhm.
They will never know there's a half a pound of carrots in a big batch of tomato sauce if it's like pureed. So get yourself a really good food processor if you're a parent and you can
Right.
sneak those things in.
That's great advice. So that was the first barrier of many. Our next one was kids wanting to eat different foods than the rest of the family. What are some practical tips about how to get the whole family on the same page with eating the family meal that was prepared for that day? I'd
Mhm.
imagine it'd be good to like shop together, let the kids see everything, and then cook together so that everybody's on the same page and they can actually get intimately involved in the entire process. What do you have to say about that with tips?
Absolutely. And I mean, I really can't, add on to that much because we'd already discussed it. And you're right. When you create an environment where everybody has buy in, you're going to have a better result. I am very, a little OCD about my kitchen. I love to cook and I love to clean as I cook. So when people don't do it my way, I don't really like it. So it's hard for me to just let people go in and just do what they want. And I've had to learn, a behavior change for myself to do that. What's the cost versus reward? Is the cost of a messy kitchen worth the reward of them experiencing something, maybe trying something, maybe learning something, being more open to eat the salad if they've made the salad versus I make the salad and then the buy-in isn't as much. So that's I think a really big helpful tool in that. And then also, like I said, maybe it's making some concessions. Maybe it's having two vegetable options. Okay, you can have salad or you can have a cooked vegetable.
Mhm.
Which do you want? Um, Tyler, my middle son, he will eat pretty much anything. He kind of picks out onions and some peppers and stuff, but for the most part, he'll eat it. Mackenzie doesn't really like things that are casserole-ish or like stews or soups or anything like that. She's more of a I like this food, I like this food, I like this food. So it might just be okay. You get cucumbers and carrots and some avocado versus everybody else has a mixed salad. So
Mhm.
I think part of it as a parent is just being prepared to give over some control, which we talk a lot about in life. And when you talk about God and you talk about just being a person, we don't have as much control as we think we do. So letting things just kind of happen, kind of going back to what's the worst that can happen, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. There is a fine balance too, because it is we talked about this often as we were trained in an environment where you're gonna eat what mom and dad make. But then, I mean, you think about like a 2-year-old toddler that goes through that phase where they want to do everything by themselves. It's really important to let that flourish. Because if you suppress that enough, something's gonna happen to their psyche. So it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, there's a fine line that you have to balance. Um, but allowing them into that space where you go grocery shopping with them and cooking with them does allow them to develop those skills and do things on their own. So they intimately interact with what you're doing. They're going to buy in to dinner and they're also developing skills to strengthen themselves independently. And it can be a safe environment too. Like people probably freak out about knives and a hot stove, but I'm like, So many families have guns and raise their kids around guns. It's a matter of practicing safety. And there are things, safety tips for the kitchen environment that kids should know, and you should develop it at young ages.
Absolutely. And just on that, I will go back to kind of talking about what you said earlier of different families have different things, and there are unsafe things in any environment, but it's creating that learning environment from a safe age. I was 9 years old driving a giant, like huge, multi-$100,000 piece of equipment
Uh-huh.
at 9 years old. But I also knew like the rules. And I mean, that's how I grew up. I grew up on a farm. It's just that's the way it was. It was the same thing. I don't remember ever not using a knife. I don't remember ever not having a pocket knife, things like that. We learned it from a young age, and I think sometimes as parents, we want to protect so much that we're like, no, no, don't touch, don't touch. And sometimes we have to almost, and I don't want to get pushback from people, but we have to let our kids experience some things and fail a little bit, because from failure comes growth.
Yeah.
And from failure comes change. I'm not saying let your kid jump into the fire, but maybe let your kid realize that the stove is hot, and no, don't touch, and things like that.
Yeah. It is so funny, I think about it too. Little girls, they always have the kitchen play sets when they're, little kids, 6 or younger. And then you raise them up if you raise them up and you raise them up to stay out of the kitchen, it's like, why did you give them a kitchen set when they were
Right.
younger? They do, and like you said, they do have to learn, and it's okay. I mean, how many times I've cut myself with a knife is ridiculous. Like, you have to learn knife skills, and you have to learn all these things to be able to do it on your own. Um, but moving on, time is the biggest barrier, and I love talking about this because I am afflicted with this barrier all the time. I feel like I'm constantly moving, so I'm always having to plan ahead, and that's probably the biggest way to get rid of this barrier. So do you have any major ways or major things that families can do together to get eliminate this barrier?
Absolutely. This is one that I'm very, like you said, we are struck for time as well. Everybody has the same 24 hours, but sometimes I just don't know where it goes. One of the things that I really suggest to families is grocery shopping, having your list, preparing and planning, like we talked about last week. Number one, that's going to help you when we talk about finances, not buying those impulse buys and not buying that extra stuff that maybe you don't need. And then also, it gives you a roadmap. So I need to go to the grocery store and have a plan. How do you start that experience? Sorry. I always start at the back of the store and move my way forward. Just that's the way I've always done it. But think about how you're going to do that and plan for that. Maybe plan a day that you go to the grocery store. Or us, we have saved so much time and money using the delivery service
Mhm.
or the going and just picking up your groceries, because I can't buy extra things once I've put my order in for the most part. And I don't have to worry about parking, getting in, I don't have to worry about seeing bunches of people with COVID, things like that. And then also, for us individually, when I get our vegetables, I clean my vegetables. So if I get celery, I go ahead, clean it, put it in like glassware where people can just open it up, get it. I also make homemade ranch. I don't buy store-bought ranch, just it's
Whoa.
really not that hard. But my kids love it and they'll eat it. So I always make a big deal of ranch, and then they know that they can just open it up, grab some carrots, and eat it. Same thing with radishes, cucumbers. I usually don't actually cut my cucumber because they get kind of slimy,
Mhm.
but everything else, my peppers, broccoli, cauliflower, where it's not a hassle to be like, oh, I have to like go get all the stuff out to make a little vegetable tray. It's, oh, I can grab some veggies. Same thing with hummus, things like that. If you're strict for time and you like finances maybe aren't as big of an issue, you can always do individual servings. The little individual hummuses with pretzels or things like that. That can be pretty cost inhibited. It can get really expensive. So
Mhm.
we don't do that. And then also just meal prep. On Sunday afternoons, a lot of times before I go back to work on Monday, I'll take Sunday afternoon to, like I said, I usually get my groceries on Sunday. So clean my vegetables, kind of plan what we're going to have for the week. And it's not necessarily even a giant menu. It's just in my head, okay, well, what are we going to have? Like usually once a week we have tacos because that's something everybody loves. It's easy. Okay, we're going to have chicken one week. Well, what can I do with the leftover chicken the next day? So just, I would say mostly that planning, it helps us.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that because the first place my mind went was my dad was a contractor and he used to make me go to jobs with him. And I'm not even kidding you, Kindan. I want to say like 50 to 75% of the time was preparing the space for, let's say, a painting job. So you would tape everything up, you would lay stuff down, you would take things off the wall, like all of this prep work for this tiny amount of time that you would actually be doing the job. But it is incredibly important to do it because otherwise it's going to be chaos. So I
Mhm.
think that we have to learn to value the time it takes us to do the preparatory work that's necessary to keep us in line to continue to practice these healthy behaviors. Like you were saying, you go do the shopping or you get your cart of groceries and then you take it home and you do all of the cleaning, all of the cutting work, all of the putting away work. So that way when your kids are hungry, all they have to do is go in the fridge and get the food out, and you as a parent don't have to worry about necessarily prepping stuff for them. They can sort of do it themselves. And so
Right.
I think that we do have to make a little bit of a mind shift and understand that it's really important to do all of this prep work ahead of time. Um, I also find it really important to block your schedule. And some people like doing that. Because I'm an Enneagram 7, so I don't really like blocking, but I do have a friend that she will not put anything on her calendar on Sunday morning because that's her time to
Okay.
shop and that's her time to prep for the week because she knows that if she goes and doesn't do that, if she does something else and doesn't get the time to do that, her whole week is going to be thrown off. So
Mhm.
block scheduling is another important part. And I also like to talk to people about this is when people don't value this time that's required for healthy eating is where can you trim the fat? And I think you've said it in the last time we talked. It's like where in your day, because there are many times in your day, because you're not always just working, where you're doing, we talk about empty calories in food. Where do you have empty calories in your schedule? Like where are you binging Netflix episodes? Where are you doing something that's not productive? And so, can you take that time instead and do healthy eating behaviors or contribute to your family's healthy eating behaviors?
Absolutely. And just on that, I wanted to take add a little detail to that. I love my Netflix. So helping people figure out a way to get what they want and what they need. So you like watching Netflix. Okay, well, if this is your time to watch Netflix, can you chop your vegetables while you're watching your iPad? Or you're not spending as much time with your kids. They need to do their homework. Can you start supper while they do their homework? When I was growing up, our bar at our house, my mom would cook dinner and we always ate late because we were a farm family and we played sports and my mom taught, my dad taught, and he drove a bus. And so we were always busy. Like we were always busy, but we ate supper together. So I would do my homework while mom like started to do dinner. And that's I think something that we can always think about is how do we do that time management and multitask? How can I get those needs met? For
Yeah.
instance, we put a gym in our garage this year during COVID because we weren't going to the gym. And then we have 3 kids and it's sometimes hard to get out. And we were making the excuse, oh, well, we couldn't get out, like you just said. So we changed the behavior. We have a TV in there. I will not lie. But
Hey.
you know what I can do? I can watch an hour of TV and walk on the treadmill or ride the bike and I'm getting my needs met and I'm getting my wants met, which
Yeah.
basically, if you look at the hierarchy of needs, that's what it's about, getting your needs met. And how you do that, that's kind of up to you. So I just want to encourage people, and I think this is where we fail in behavior change with people is they think it's all or nothing. They think that it can't be fun. They think that, like we talked about, exercise can't be playing at the park with your kids. I'm not going to lie. Running around chasing my toddler is more exercise and it's harder than going to the gym and lifting. I'm not kidding. My kid weighs 30 pounds. He's a hoss. So I have, my husband jokes around that I have big guns. And it was during COVID. I was like, I haven't lifted a weight in 3 months, but I carry around my toddler.
Right.
So trying to just as a family, and this goes back to exercise behavior too, getting your family to do things together to get all of those needs met the easiest way. What do they say? Work smarter, not harder.
Hmm. Yeah. Efficiency for sure. For sure. Yeah, and I think that's important too when you're time restricted on the road is efficiency. So a lot I mean, we're like you mentioned, you played sports, so you were probably always moving somewhere from school to a sport and things like that. So I think it's important to plan ahead as much as you can. So sometimes for me, before I even go to a restaurant, I'll look up the menu to look up what dishes I can get that are relatively healthy and how I can make them healthy at that restaurant. Or like if you know that you have to stop for fast food, there are several ways to make a fast food menu more healthy, like grilled chicken versus fried chicken, or you don't eat the bun, or you remove the mayo, say sans butter, so you don't cook them in butter. Or if you're going to like a gas station, get some higher protein options like
Mhm.
beef jerky
Yeah.
or boiled eggs, or I love a protein bar, just limited sugar. Don't make it a glorified candy bar, but just
But those ones are really good too, I
there.
will say.
But just planning ahead and thinking about efficiently planning for a family is really important because otherwise you're going to have your kids go in there, they're going to scatter, they're going to pick up the chips and do all these things. Do you have anything to say about that type of topic?
No, and actually, that's one of the things we hadn't really discussed previously. Were how do you do those healthy options like gas station options, and when you go to like for something fun, like you're on a road trip or something, and that's again preparing that stuff, but getting those snacks that are higher protein. Instead of chips, we try to do pretzels a lot of the
Mhm.
time. We do beef jerky. I like to do, like I said, protein bars or even just like granola bars where I can control caloric content. So no, it's a lot cheaper to go to Walmart to buy the 100-calorie granola bars in a box this big versus one at the convenience store.
Yeah.
And then also limiting those extra calories. So not drinking pop, which I will say I drink diet soda or Coke Zero, things like that.
Same.
But okay, well, limit those, even those type of beverages, or do waters, or do flavored waters, or things like that. I will say my go-to is this, and it's pomegranate lemonade. I
Oh,
used to be able to buy it. It was Ozarka. I used to be able to buy it at Walmart. Now I have to order it. So I am like fancy schmancy ordering Madeira Creek sparkling water on Amazon, and it comes, in cases, and I buy like two at a time because I know if I have that, I will drink that instead of soda.
yeah.
Um, I grew up on a farm. We had well water and we had a reverse osmosis system. So it was amazing water. So other water, I'm like, eh. But I know it has no calories, no sodium, and it's an option that's a healthier option than drinking soda.
Yeah.
So I think that that's it. Maybe trying to encourage people not to eliminate everything, but just what is the healthier option you can make. Like
Mhm.
I mentioned last week, if you are a soda drinker, drink one soda a day versus the eight you were drinking before.
Mhm.
And I think that that is why people are so scared to talk to a dietitian or an exercise physiologist or a behavior change specialist because they think that we're going to tell them change everything, don't do it. They see these shows like The Biggest Loser or things like that where it's changed your whole life. And that's not realistic for the everyday person. We are not trying to help, or we're not trying to create a place that makes you fail. We want you to thrive. So we're going to ask you to do small behavior changes and little things that add up to those big things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I do. Um, I would love to talk to you about Stephanie that I had on before. We talked about this is really short. I'll keep it short. But we talked about how it's crazy that that concept that you were just talking about in nutrition, it's completely different than how we think about it in exercise. Like in exercise, let's say you're on a squat program, your max weight is 100 pounds. We're trying to get you to 300 pounds. We never say that we're going to change everything and tomorrow you're going to max out at 300 pounds. We do incremental changes and we program your program strategically so we get you to that point that you want to be. But in nutrition, it's so weird. It's like we do want to do everything cold turkey. And in fact, I've seen dietitians that do that. They strip everything off the table. They say
Yeah.
we're going to make this change right away. And it's just, it never works. Because if you did that in a squat program, you would fail, you'd like tear your ACL, you'd do something, and then you'd be back to ground zero or less. And so it's changing mindset now with nutrition to understand that that should be the case too with nutrition. It's this slow build. It's making one change at a time. It's seeing how you like that change and then course correcting.
And I think on that, just to go back and bring it back to the family, that's a great point. Because if a family has never eaten like this and we are talking with them about changing behaviors, it's not going to work if they do what you just said, go from 100 to 300. Not going to work. I am not going to ask you to remove all the sugar cereal from your house if that's the only thing your kids have ever eaten. You know, it makes no sense to set someone up for failure. One, you're not successful as a practitioner. Two, they're not successful as a person, and it's going to breed, you know, some of that stuff like resentment, and they're not going to want to do it. And it just creates an environment where nobody feels like they're winning.
Right. Right. Yeah. Crazy. I love that conversation. But for the sake of time,
For another podcast.
let's go to cooking skills. This is challenging because I know that not many people know how to cook or cook well, but I also know that cooking does not have to be challenging. So, do you have any practical ways that you can address this barrier if you're not necessarily the best cook?
Yeah. Okay. So I think the first thing is to start small. Don't, like we mentioned before, start with something that is overwhelming and looks crazy. Do something simple. Like there's a cookbook that I remember my grandmother got me when I went to college called the 4 Ingredient Cookbook. And it literally had 4 ingredients. So it might be chicken and rice and a can of cream of mushroom soup and some broccoli. And then, yeah, you can throw some salt and pepper and some stuff like that in. But create things where you set yourself, again, up for success. You know, don't put yourself in a situation where it's overwhelming. It becomes burdensome. It's not fun. And you just want to just throw your hands up and be like, whatever, we're going to get McDonald's.
Mhm.
And then also be kind to yourself. If you mess up when you're starting to learn this process, whether it be by yourself or with your family, just create a safe space where if you mess up and it's really bad, own it and be like, we'll try next time. I've done this before with a new recipe, and we all kind of start to eat it and we're like, no, 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 this is not what it looked like. It from the get-go, I was like, I don't think this is going to work, and it didn't. So give yourself the grace. And I think that that's something that we can all appreciate.
Mhm.
Again, start small. You know, maybe try things that are less more prep and less cooking. So wraps, you know, get a rotisserie chicken, throw some diced carrots in there, some avocado and some lettuce, and make a wrap. You know, so just some small things. And we can definitely talk more about that at another time if we would want to.
Yeah, yeah. I think I think there's some great tips. I also believe that the crock pot is like God's gift to creation
Right.
because I think people just like the word exercise are intimidated. Cooking, people can be intimidated by the word cooking, but really, honestly, I think some of cooking is just putting stuff together. So it's literally like opening up cans, opening up packages, dumping it all into a pot, and then letting it come to a temperature, praying it doesn't burn, and then like you have food. So you cooked, but it's like you really just put stuff together in a pot. And so the crock pot, the pressure cooker is a great tool to use to just throw stuff together, let it cook. And that's my youngest sister, not a good cook. She's probably going to listen and I'm going to hear some of her. But she's learned to use her pressure cooker and her crock pot. She just throws stuff together and she's a family of 4 and it feeds her family every night. So I think that's a really great tip to learn. And learning together too. I love the idea of bringing your family and friends that know how to cook in one spot so you can learn from them. And I think this is even more important because I love family tradition. And I think that we as a culture have lost the idea and the art of a family recipe or family cooking. And in fact, I'm doing this project right now with my cousin, and we found a whole box of recipes from like 4 or 5 generations ago. So we're putting together this book of family recipes, and it's important to go back to those basics. And like I said, invite your family in that knows how to cook and just watch them, observe them, ask questions, and then take the those cooking practices on with you to the next generations.
I love that you said that. And I wish I could show you this whole, well, actually, this whole area right here is cookbooks, and these are all families. I have the old school Tupperware box from my grandmother,
Yeah,
my
you do.
dad's mom, Riri. And then she made cookbooks, and we have, like you just said, that family tradition and recipe. And part of that is getting back to that environment that's fun and exciting. At holidays, we've created some different traditions in our little, nucleus family where we make a Christmas lasagna. So Christmas Eve, we make homemade lasagna, and that way we don't have to do anything on Christmas Day. We
Yeah.
graze in the morning. I've made a coffee cake Christmas Eve day. So we have coffee cake in the morning, and then we just graze on like veggies and meats and cheeses, and then we have lasagna. But that was something we created for ourselves. So that's another thing is, again, giving yourself that ability to have some grace and doing what works for you guys. Don't buy into the hype of, well, the we have some really cool friends, the Nyers over here, that do some really cool stuff with like theme nights and fun. I'm just not creative. That's just not me. I'm black and white. I'm like, give me a book and I'll read you this, but don't ask me to color you a picture because it
Yeah.
will look horrible.
Uh,
So creating what works for you and your family, and really don't compare yourself to the Pinterest moms that are amazing and the bloggers and all the things that are so perfect, because I am the example of the Pinterest fail. Like, I think that's the funny part. I'm like, I'll show you what it's supposed to look like, and then here's the reality.
right. Right. That's funny. Yeah, yeah. Comparison's the root of all evil, especially with cooking skills.
Yeah.
But the next barrier too is a huge one, finances and cost. Do you have any ways to make healthy family eating cost effective?
Yeah, and I think that this is something that we can all appreciate. There's so much information out there on what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat. I think you had talked about it, GMOs and organic food, and buy what you can afford. I
Mhm.
promise you, the organic cucumber is really no different than the 40-cent cucumber. I could go on a whole soapbox on organic foods and how my field could be non-organic and yours could be organic, and mine can run off and yours is no longer organic. But that's another day. Um, but it's also thinking about things like, don't buy a name brand. If Look at the ingredients, teaching somebody to read
Mhm.
labels. So I wish I had to right here, like a great value and a regular. It would might be the exact same ingredients. I watched a documentary, and my husband was telling me about some things that he had seen about different ways products are made, where it might be in the same factory, but this didn't live up to like the Campbell's brand, so it's the off brand or something like that.
Yeah,
So
I so just a little insert there. I was actually talking to my family. I swear I'm not an alcoholic, but a lot of liquors, a lot of liquors are made that way, and people don't know. The same top shelf that you drink is made in the same factory by the same people and has a cheap plastic bottle label on it. And the same thing with food, like you were saying. Looking at those labels, it'll show you that they literally have the same ingredients, but you're spending $10 more for this one. So,
and
yeah.
that's a huge thing, I think, for budgeting, is getting over that, being a brand, there's a word for it, but I won't say a brand specific person. If the Great Value rice is the same rice as the fancy rice, buy the Great Value rice.
Mhm.
Buy, and there are a couple of things that you do. And again, this is where reading labels is important. In my job that I do at the nutrition center, I do a lot of food labels. So, Great Value stuff sometimes has more sodium than like the craft. So notice that. But for the most part, you can buy food that is inexpensive. A lot of times where you see those expensive items are where you're going to get into those processed foods. A bag of chips is expensive.
It
A bag of
is.
cereal, the difference between a box of cereal and a bag of cereal is very different. You can buy a whole giant deal of oatmeal for half the cost of a tiny box of cereal, and it'll last you for 3 months.
Mhm.
So thinking about different things like that. And then also, buying in bulk when you can. If you have a big family, it might be cost effective for you to buy the 3 or the 5 pound ground beef and cut it into 1 pound sections and freeze it. invest in some wax paper, not even a food saver, some wax paper and some off-brand Ziplocs, and you can keep your food for a while. And then also utilizing leftovers. We do this in our house a lot. I don't like to throw things away. I don't like waste. So if there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, what can I put together? The other day we had tacos, and we didn't really have a whole, like enough tacos for everybody to do tacos again. So we had taco soup, which is basically throw the rest of your ground beef, throw your corn, throw your black beans, throw some onions and peppers in there and put it in the crock pot,
Mhm.
and you have a whole nother meal.
Yeah.
So
I
looking at
love that stuff. Yeah.
and looking at things that are cost effective, a bag of rice is $1. You can buy a pound of ground beef for about $4. A pepper for 50 cents, an onion for 50 cents, roughly. These are not like
Mhm.
exact prices. And some olive oil, and you have dirty rice,
Yeah.
which can feed a family of portion size, correct, 5 to 6.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And thinking about the food items that help you, be able to thin out your meal a little bit more and spread it further, things like you've said already, rice, beans is great for that, whole grain pastas, ways to put bulk into a meal so that you can spread it a little bit further. And some other things too, I know some people would argue that fresh is better than frozen, but if you're financially planning, frozen can be just as good. I mean, you can definitely argue that there are nutritional differences between the two, but frozen is good, canned is good. You're still feeding them vegetables. Um, Eating less meat is another good way to do that because meats can be expensive, and I am definitely a carnivore, so I understand the importance of eating meat, and I love eating meat. You're a farm girl, so you're definitely a
right.
carnivore, but there are ways to cut costs because meat is so expensive. You can find some plant-based protein options, or something like eggs is great, things like that. Um, I love the idea of starting your own garden. And if you don't know how to start your garden, you can start small, maybe with an herb garden. It's a great way to save money. Even speaking of herb gardens, the herbs themselves can be really expensive. I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
it's crazy. Um, and then keeping a well-stocked pantry on things like rices, pastas, grains, all that stuff is good. And buying local seasonal produce is another great way to save costs. You can go to your local farmers market almost every weekend. Some cities have them every day, and you can buy local seasonal produce. And sometimes you can even talk down the farmers to get it a little bit cheaper. Um,
And with that being said, that's also a great way to support your community, and to
yeah.
give back and to eat, like we were just talking about, whole foods that are from your area. They say a lot of times, and I wanted to just mention this really quickly about frozen foods, that a fresh food and a frozen food, if you do not have a frozen food that has added ingredients, they actually can be more nutritionally dense because there has been no time from the time. So basically, usually frozen foods are flash frozen right there after picking, like fruits and vegetables. Whereas, you get an apple that has to travel from wherever it was picked to the distribution center to the grocery store. So the nutritional value of that food starts to disintegrate.
Mm,
Whereas a frozen food, if you just have like broccoli florets that are just flash frozen right there, they have not lost any of that nutritional value. So again, you can argue either way. Yeah, I'm going to choose a fresh apple over some frozen apples if I can, just because that's me. But we don't see a lot of nutritional differences in those. Canned foods can definitely be different because of the sodium content and if they have nitrates or sulfates or anything like that. And then one other thing about the protein, when you say go meatless, it is kind of a challenge and fun for somebody that has never, if we ate any, like sometimes we would just eat meat at dinner,
mhm.
here's a steak, go find something else if you want something else. But we do a protein pasta, where I don't feel so worried about my kiddos getting protein when they can eat that if they don't want to eat meatballs or things like that. Like you mentioned, eggs, and then nut butters, peanut butters, if you don't have the allergies, hummus. There's a lot of things that you can do that are non-meat options.
Yeah, love that. Well, I think we should skip the next two because the one we talked a lot about with our first barrier, the taste of healthy foods.
Yeah.
And then the proper introduction of healthy foods, we can talk about that at a later time. I think that's really important, but that I mean that can go really deep with introduction of foods. So let's move on to mirroring. Mirroring is important for behaviors. What should parents keep in mind to be the best mirror for their child with their child's eating behaviors?
Well, I want to keep this one short for us as well. Just modeling what you want your child or your family to do. Be the example. Try to always do your best, put your best foot forward, so to speak, and don't ask them to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. If you're not willing to eat broccoli, it's going to be very difficult to get the buy in for them to do it. The same thing goes for any type of food. If they see you eating junk food all the time, and then you say, well, you can't have junk food. That doesn't make sense to them. So try to lead by example, and
Yeah.
just work as a family to do it all together. Don't have that food in your house if you know that's a go-to. If you know that ice cream is something you want every night, just don't buy ice cream. Make it an effort to have to go out and make it a treat. That okay, we're going to go buy ice cream
Yeah.
and have it as a family. Make it a whole experience versus just and those can get into such little things like portion control and things like that.
Yeah, that one's pretty simple. It's like monkey see, monkey do.
Yeah,
I'm glad we
exactly,
kept that one
exactly.
short. But the next one is portion sizes, and this one is a big one too, and it goes along with the mirroring thing. Like if you're seeing your dad, like I did, eat huge portions of food, you're going to be more likely to eat huge portions of food. But something that I thought of, and you can speak to this too, and other things is, and what I want to make sure that we go over is so simple. And I mentioned this in the last time we talked, is using your hand for portion sizes. And this is something that I wrote about in my book too, because you can do it together as a family. So everybody's hand is sized relative to their size. And so the main food groups, you can use your hand to determine how much of each food group you need. So the palm is typically for your protein sources like your meats. Your
Mhm,
thumb tip is normally for your fats,
mhm.
like your butters, and then two fists is normally for your veggies. Cupped hand is normally for your fruit, and then if you make a fist, that's normally how much of your starch that you need, so, like, your potatoes, your rice, things like that, and then your entire thumb, which I was really sad by, is for your nut butters and for your cheese. I was like, "That's impossible," but that's how much cheese
You're
you
like,
should eat.
everybody sums together?
Yeah. So and that's what I like to coach for portion sizes because I mean, you'll be like I said, you'll be really disheartened if you actually see how much peanut butter you should eat. And it's a great way for families to come together and see how does mine look compared to yours. So do you have any other ways that families can practice good portion sizes?
I think that actually hits it on the head. There are so many other ways that you can do with measuring and portion control and things like that. But I'm just thinking about it like that. Your stomach is the size of your fist. And that's what I always like to tell people, that that's as much food that should be, in there at one time. So looking at those things such as your hands as guides I think that's fantastic, especially for somebody that isn't well versed in some of these other areas of nutrition or ways to do these things. That's a great first step.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it goes back to we've talked about this before, you mentioned it a lot, intuitive eating.
Mhm.
So if you do have a problem, a barrier to get over where your child has been eating huge copious amounts of food, but you want to restrict them and provide to them what they actually need, the best way to do it is to give them what they need and then talk them through intuitive eating. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Absolutely. And this is something we actually have to practice quite often in our home. Our middle child, Tyler, has Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So he is non ambulatory. That means he's in a wheelchair full time. Muscular dystrophy usually affects the lower half of the body first and then will work its way up. So Tyler has a different caloric need than a lot of 10-year-olds because he is not as active as most 10-year-olds. So we have to look at watching what Tyler eats. We notice a lot with just the Duchenne community in general. They have a tendency to become overweight, and then in the later years, they tend to be malnourished. So something we talk about is portion size, and then also intuitive eating. am I still hungry? So we eat our portion and then we sit, sit, let your food digest. Let's talk for a little bit. And how do you feel? And also utilizing that to see if you're really hungry. Are you hungry because you're hungry, or are you hungry because you're bored? Do you just want a snack because everybody else is having a snack? My husband and I, we talk a lot about how we were never meant to be these sit at a table and eat 3 meals a day society. It was, we were grazers. We ate when we needed to. We put food into our body that kept us full. That's why I always suggest a protein source at every meal, because protein is going to keep you full.
Mhm.
If you eat the same amount of calories in beef jerky versus a Snickers bar, you're going to be hungry in 20 minutes after you eat that Snickers bar. But that protein source from that beef jerky is going to keep you feeling full longer.
Mhm.
So utilizing those approaches, and then also just having them identify what a portion size looks like. Let them fix their plate sometime. And then, like you just said, show them what the portion size looks like. I always get so disheartened, like you were saying, with the peanut butter. That's me with like crackers or chips. When I look at the back of, a box and it says the serving size is 6 Triscuits, I'm like, what?
What am I
Like,
gonna do with
who
that?
eats 6 Triscuits,
Put
and
that in my
things like,
mouth at one time. Like,
right, right. I'm like, I just ate like 400. And being aware, and I think that's key, is just, again, the reading labels and learning what that looks like. And especially if you have always been an overeater, or if you've always been one that's really never thought about that or looked at that. And some people have never had to, because weight or nutrition has not been an issue for them in the past.
Mhm.
And that's where we get into wanting to create healthy behaviors from the get-go, where it never is a factor that your 10-year-old has type 2 diabetes, or they have high triglycerides at 14, because, and they could be very thin, but they've eaten nothing but junk their whole life. So when we talk about nutrition, we're not talking about, am I skinny, or am I, healthy in the terms of I look a certain way. It's, am I healthy in the terms of, how does my heart function? How do my lungs function? How is my liver? How is my glucose? All of those that actually are what we want to think about when we talk about why we should be eating healthy.
Mhm. Yeah, some great points you made there for sure. The next one, I think we're gonna skip through the next one with the family and all that, because I feel like that's mostly just setting up boundaries, making sure grandmom doesn't act out of character. So
Right.
that one's pretty straightforward. But this last one I really, really want to dig into, because we are in a global pandemic season. COVID is a thing, and we're gonna be sitting here for some time in whatever way we're sitting here. Pennsylvania versus Arkansas versus California, everybody looks different, but we're all afflicted with similar problems. And one of the bigger problems is, how am I going to feed my family and keep it healthy? Because maybe my finances are restricted. Maybe I don't have access to a grocery store as easily as I did before. I have to think about perishable versus non-perishable food items, what I can keep in my house that's going to be sustained. So do you have any ways that families can get over this barrier and eat healthy during this time?
Yeah, I think we actually kind of hit on all of those points in all of the topics we've talked about so far, looking at finances. So thinking about things that are sustainable for your family, food products that are lower in cost, such as fresh fruits and vegetables in season usually are lower cost, rice, beans, shelf stable things like you were mentioning, and then also frozen items. And then if you can think of ways of getting your food, so maybe you're not going out. So the delivery services, a lot of times those can be cost effective. If you do, for instance, we did like we paid for a whole year of delivery versus an individual delivery service, which actually ends up being astronomical if you're ordering groceries frequently.
Mhm.
Other things that you can think about are ways to still do things. We are in a time where, we have time to spend with our family. Maybe we are at a place where we are working from home, which can cause its own problems, but also it can create some really great opportunities for that family time. One of the biggest things, this is not on this topic, but it talks about setting a schedule. And if you're working from home, make it just the same as if you were working from the office, where you have a shut off time. You allow yourself to have that family time. You are not always on call. You are not always tied to your screen just because you can be here. So cooking more, and then taking the opportunity to, maybe we can't be with all our friends and family all over, but if you have the opportunity to get outside, you can still get outside and you can burn off some of that energy and you can do things. So that kind of comes into the exercise component, which, again, I feel like when we just talk about one component, we don't see the whole picture, because it's doing all those things. We have kids that are gaining astronomical amount of weight because they're eating unhealthy during this pandemic, and they're not doing any exercise, because going outside has been, off limits, where it's not really the going outside and playing, it's going outside and playing with 20 of your friends.
Mhm.
So just thinking about those things, and then also just being mindful of, you know, did I eat like that before? Did I, people talk about the COVID-19, always the freshman 15. Now people are gaining this COVID-19 because they are changing their eating habits. They're having some issues, such as some seasonal affective disorder almost, or some mental health issues, where when, they say, like, well, do I eat because I'm depressed, or am I depressed and I'm eating? So just the mental health. So taking care of yourself in general and taking care of your family in general, I think, is very important.
I like what you said about treat when you're working from home, treat your work day the way that you would if you were working at work. So when you sign off, you sign off. And what it made me think of is, with eating, because we're talking about nutrition, it's because I find myself doing this too. I'm working and then I'm like, "Ooh, I want a snack." And
Right.
sometimes I have to think, I'm like, "Would you do that if you were at work?" And
Right.
and would you what yeah, really, like, would you do that if you were at work? Would you go to the vending machine? Would you do this? Is this actually the time that you would take lunch at work? And it is, it's important to know, because when we work at home, I mean, I'm 10 steps from my refrigerator. So, it's that mindfulness and changing your mindset. But I also found too that changing up your protein game a little can be cost effective, and it can be better, because you can choose non-perishable food items like canned tuna or chicken or packaged tuna, things like that. That's a game changer. I always have packaged tuna, and whatever, say what you want about it. It's a great source of protein and it's tasty. Um, and also, like I mentioned before, canned frozen foods are okay during this time, and that's what's going to be shelf stable. If you can't go out to the farmer's market because your city doesn't have that available, you can buy as much of a canned and a frozen food that you need to keep, and it'll stay for a while.
And
Um,
Brittany, I wanted you to go ahead and touch on what we had kind of discussed about what happens if you are in a different environment. We're in Arkansas, you're in Philly right now, but for the most part, we don't live in a place that's a food desert. So, what is someone to do if they can't get, like, what can I do? You know?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's a great question. During this time, it's hard because I don't know what meal delivery services look like, let's say, like, in an inner city. I don't know what that looks like. I know that in some cities, internationally too, they're locked in their apartments and things like that, and people bring them food. And so you don't really have too many options outside of that. But keeping what I would say in general, like I mentioned already, is keeping non-perishable food items that are also relatively healthy. So your protein, I would recommend healthy food and snack options like protein powders, protein bars, if you have those, an option for those, or like you mentioned, your lower sugar or your calorie restricted granola bars.
Mhm.
Nuts and nut butters are also great. Um, and if you do have access to something like a corner store, it's going to that corner store and figuring out how I'm going to be able to spread this food, and what nutritious options, or relative nutritious options, I can select so that everybody's going to be happy. Because you do have to be able to please the palate of your child at the same time as feeding them all the nutrients that they need. Um,
One other thing I just wanted to mention to our families in Arkansas specifically are we do have options through our schools and through food pantries. Our kids are eating for free right now in Arkansas. That's breakfast and lunch. And if we would go virtually again, you have the option to get food for your family during that time for virtual learning. So there are opportunities for families to still get and those are nutritionally balanced meals for their child if need be. So just to really think about options and what's out there. And that might just be doing a little digging, maybe calling your local, I don't know who that would be, if that would be DHS or what that would be, but calling your school administrator to find out where the meals are delivered or how you would get those, that's always a really good option.
yeah, and churches are a great option too. I know a lot of churches, even pre-COVID, my church in Tallahassee had a huge food pantry and we would deliver to people on a weekly basis. So, that's a great option too, in addition to all the ones that you mentioned. But I think too, and one of the last points that we'll touch on is having access to foods that are going to help boost your immune system
Mhm.
to help you better be able to recover if you do get COVID or if you do get flu. The flu season is coming up, so I mean we got a double whammy here. So what types of foods would you say are good to help stock up or help improve and boost your immune system?
All those natural foods that have the vitamin C's, so your oranges, your orange juice, fruits and vegetables have all kinds of vitamins, whether they're your fat soluble, your A, D, E, and K, or your water soluble, your B's, your C's. And then also vitamin D is huge right now. There's a lot of research out there looking at vitamin D and COVID and showing that people that have higher vitamin D levels are less susceptible to develop symptoms. And if they do get COVID, their symptoms seem to be not quite as bad. And one of the things, again, this is where we get into the research, where we kind of nerd out, is okay. So we know that vitamin D comes from the sun, but people haven't been out. So has that been a factor playing into it? We
Yeah.
also know that vitamin D is not as readily available for our body if we don't have enough calcium in our body. So are we drinking milk? Are we getting a source of calcium? If we can only eat this much cheese, is that going to be enough for us? You know, do we need to look
No.
at other types of dairy, such as low-fat yogurts or Greek yogurts, which is a great way to get some extra protein as well.
Yeah.
And then also eating just whole natural foods. You know, there's so many fad diets out there that talk about eating this or that. But if you go back to the basics of eating things that you can find in nature, if it comes from a plant or a tree or the ground, it's probably good. If it is if it's not found in nature, like where do you find an Oreo? You know, maybe not the best option. Like, where do I find and I'm not gonna lie, I do love myself a Payday. Where is the Payday candy bar tree? Because I need one of those. You know, so thinking about real food, and that's what I always go back to when someone's in the grocery store and they've never done something like this. Shop the perimeter.
Mhm.
The aisles are where you get into trouble, and the aisles are where you spend a lot of money.
Yeah.
Soda, chips, you know, those processed foods. If you just shop the perimeter and stay with your dairy, your milk, I'm sorry, milk is dairy, your dairy, your proteins, your vegetables, your fruits, your breads, things like that, you're going to be pretty good to go.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. And to add fuel to the vitamin D fire, I know 80% of Americans are deficient in vitamin D. And so it is important to get outside. And I do want to say I'm a proponent of multivitamins. I take a multivitamin every day. And in my head, I'm like, I'm covering my bases. Like I'm good here on all these fronts. So even if I don't get the vegetables or the fruits or whatever I need in, that's going to cover those bases for me in a whole food form, I can get that in a multivitamin form. So if you haven't thought about that for your family, that's a great way to get all the vitamins and minerals and things that you need to help you boost your immune system during these times. Um, the whole food discussion, 100% support. I always in my own dietary practice, I like to coach people to eat as few or as little food that has a food label as possible. Because
Mhm.
typically, if foods have a food label, there's some sort of processing, even something like a bag of salted nuts. there's a form of food processing that happens and additives and things like that. And so, like you said, shopping the perimeter, you get the fresh produce, you get the fresh meats, you get everything like that. And you're reducing your intake of highly processed foods that aren't going to be good for you in the long haul.
Yeah.
So, so many good tips. This is great, and it was such a good conversation. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Dr. Fawcett?
No, I think I mean, we could go on and on, but I feel like people would get a little bored for hours and hours of podcasts. So we'll
Yeah.
definitely have to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure. Like I said the first time, I always enjoy talking to you because I can feel your passion every time that you talk about nutrition and the family and getting people's behaviors shifted around this family nutrition topic. So I really appreciate you being on, and I look forward to future discussions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Hey guys, I am so excited for my new book entitled Through His Strength by Improving Ours Family to be released on February 4th. This book has been strategically designed to educate parents and caretakers on what the Bible and research have to say about exercise and nutrition. And then after they soak in all that good information, they will rally the family troops and complete discussion questions and fun practical application activities. To learn more about my new book, visit my website at www.drbrittanyRallman.com. That's www.drbrittanyRallman.com.